Well, good morning. We're going to start today a little bit differently than I have in the past when I've taught here at Anchor. I want to start today by kind of doing a little bit game or really more of an exercise with you guys. And so here's how this is going to go. I'm going to say a list of names. And then you, in your household, I'm not going to be able to hear you, but I'm just going to go with faith. In your house, you're going to say what that list of names is from or remind you of. Okay, so we'll start here. Ross, Rachel, Chandler, Joey, Monica, and Phoebe. It's friends, right? Another list of names. We have George, Jerry, Elaine, and Kramer. It's from Seinfeld. My Gen Z people, there was a TV show called Seinfeld that was really popular for a while. Another list of names, we have Raphael, Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Donatello. Right? It's the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And then we also have James, Peter, John, and the rest of the 12. And those are the 12 disciples that we see in the Bible, that we see these 12 people that Jesus called to be his followers as he did his earthly ministry. What's interesting is I think that as a people, and you look at how popular some of those TV shows were and still are, even to this day, people are watching reruns of those shows. I think there's something about watching a friend group that captivates our attention. If you look at the average plot of, say, an episode of Friends or an episode of Seinfeld, it's not that interesting. Right? There's not a lot that actually happens in a lot of those episodes. So what is it that captivates our attention so well? I think we are fascinated by watching close friends together. We're fascinated by watching this intimate friend group and how they interact with each other. And I actually believe that the reason why is that we know, whether in our head or even deep down in our subconscious, we know that we are made for community. We're actually made for a deep community. Even if we don't recognize that with our own heads, I think something deep in our souls knows that. And so we're fascinated and we're drawn to these deep friendships that we see in pop culture and TV and books and all these types of things. I think we crave that type of intimacy, even in a friend group. And so while we can't have what those fictional friend groups have, and again, I want to say that clearly, we can't have that because it's not real. Well, we can't have that deep friendship that you see in a made-up TV show. I actually do think that there are some really solid lessons that we can learn from these first followers of Jesus, from these 12 people who, by the world's eyes, were average individuals, just like you and me, average people that were chosen by God himself when he came to earth. And we're chosen by Jesus to come alongside him and learn and eventually do the work of Jesus. And so in this series we're all learning here, this week we're going to learn what does it mean to find your people. And to do that, we're going to look at these 12 individuals who followed Jesus. And so in this series, we've been in the book of Mark. Mark is a gospel, which means that it's an account of Jesus's life and his ministry. And it was written by an individual named Mark, hence the name, who was around Jesus when he was living and doing ministry. And so we're going to be kind of referencing two sections of Mark today, and I want to read them now just so we all get on the same page. If you have a Bible or a Bible app on your phone, you can open it. We're also going to put it up on the screen. The first passage or text is from Mark chapter 3, starting in verse 13. It says this: "Afterward, Jesus went up on a mountain and called out the ones he wanted to go with him, and they came to him. Then he appointed 12 of them and called them his apostles. They were to accompany him, and he would send them out to preach, giving them authority to cast out demons. And these are the 12 he chose: Simon, who he named Peter, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, but Jesus nicknamed them sons of thunder." We're going to stop there. These three are often what we refer to as the three, right? The three disciples that Jesus was closest to out of that group of 12. If you've ever had a large friend group and felt like, I don't know if I can be equal friends with all of them, it's okay. Jesus wasn't either. And if that's good enough for Jesus, it's got to be good enough for us as well, right? So those are the three, and then the list keeps going. It says Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, to designate a different James, Thaddeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who later betrayed them. And then the other text we're going to look at today is a few chapters later. And again, when we look at the Bible, oftentimes chapters are different than like in the chapters of a fictional book. There's a lot that can happen in between these chapters. So 3 chapters later, in Mark chapter 6, it says this. Then Jesus went from village to village teaching the people. And starting in verse 7 of chapter 6, it says, and he called his 12 disciples together and began sending them out 2 by 2, giving them authority to cast out evil spirits. He told them to take nothing for their journey except for a walking stick, no food, no traveler's bag, no money. He allowed them to wear sandals, but not to take a change of clothes. Wherever you go, he said, stay in the same house until you leave town. But if any place refuses to welcome you or listen to you, shake its dust from your feet as you leave to show that you have abandoned these people to their fate. So the disciples went out, telling everyone they met to repent of their sins and turn to God. And they cast out many demons and healed many sick people, anointing them with olive oil. There's a lot that we can take from these passages, right? There's a lot going on in these passages. There's actually a lot that goes on between these different passages in Mark as well. And again, we're going to look at these 12, but also the 3 that Jesus had. And you see, we're going to use these to talk about what does it mean to find your people. And I want, when we talk about your people, I kind of want to define that a little bit. You see, I think all of us have lots of friends. And friends are amazing, and we can have varying degrees of friendship. Facebook has helped define what a friend means or doesn't mean for a lot of people, right? I'm in the generation that still remembers when you needed a .edu email address to get a Facebook account because it was only for college students. And I remember thinking, okay, I have school friends, and then I have like Facebook friends, and I have close friends. As we want to talk about a specific type of friends that you're going to have in life, and we're going to just kind of call that your people. Your people are the types of people that you call at 2 a.m. when you have to go to the hospital with your child all of a sudden. Your people are the ones who show up at your house without even asking, just because they know that you actually need them to be present right then. So we're going to talk about what does it look like to find and do life with your people. And again, like it's really important. We're not talking about how to find friends. And in fact, sometimes your people can even be family. 2 of those 3 that we talked about with Jesus's 3, most biblical scholars agree were actually first cousins of Jesus. They were family in a blood sense as well. And so we're going to talk about what does it mean to find your people. And so the first thing that I noticed when I looked at these texts, when I look at how Jesus chose his people is that they were chosen intentionally. And so as you're taking notes alongside this message, I want you to write this down. Write down, my people are chosen intentionally. And again, I want to be clear. This is not saying every friend that you ever have in your life. These are your people, the close-knit people that you have around you. I think it's important to know that Jesus did not choose his 12 randomly, right? There was some serious intent behind it. I can't picture Jesus saying, well, I'm trying to figure out these 12 people who are going to do really important work, who are going to do a really important thing. And this guy has been around me since we were in school together. So sure, he doesn't really fit with anything, but let's throw him into the 12 just because he's been around for a while. But how often do we do that? How often do we have one of our people be someone that's just been around because we went to elementary school with them, but oftentimes they hurt us or they don't reciprocate that feeling of being people with each other? You see, you have to choose your people intentionally. I think you should be friends with a decent amount of people. You should be connected to a lot of people in some way. People you agree with on a lot of things, people you disagree with on a lot of things. Jesus did that too. But when we're talking about your people, that's a group you're going to be super deeply connected with. It's going to be a group of people that you have to trust completely. It's going to be a group of people that you're intimate with in that friendship sense. And that probably sounds scary. I actually hope it does, because it kind of is scary, because true trust is scary. But that's also why when we're talking about your people, it's going to be a small group. If you try to have 20 people be your people, you're going to end up probably hurt or disappointed, and they might as well. But I also think that when we have that special trust, when we have that special bond with people we call our people, when we have intentionally chosen them, there's a special bond that comes when we choose other people and they intentionally choose us as well. I think a lot of us have known what that's felt like in a romantic sense, and we forget that there can be amazing benefits when that happens in a friendship sense as well, that intentionality of saying, through thick and thin, I'm going to choose to still be with you, to have you be my people. And so I just think this, our people need to be chosen intentionally. And some questions that I want you to ask yourself to make sure that you're choosing your people intentionally are this. Do we have the same view of what a relationship looks like or a friendship looks like? Do we treat time similarly? That matters. Are we in a similar stage of life? And not to say that you can't rely on people that are in a different stage of life. It just, something's a little bit different when you're not going through the same things together, when you're not in the trenches together. Do we value the same core things? If you're watching this and you're a committed follower of Jesus, I would say that your people probably need to also be committed followers of Jesus, because when that phone rings at 2 a.m., when you get a response from a doctor that you don't know what it means for you, your child, your family, I promise you, the people that you need to lean on in that moment, you want to make sure that you guys have at least roughly the same view of why we are here and what our purpose is and how the world works. And then finally, we talked about being committed to the same things last week. And I think that's a really good question to ask ourselves again when we are finding our people, which is, are we committed to the same things? And so at Anchor, one of the things that we are committed to is we're committed to giving you opportunities to find your people. Now, we can't find your people for you. We're not an online friend matchmaking service. And even if we were, it wouldn't work all the time. We can't find your people for you. But what we can do is give you opportunities to find your people here in this community. And so some of those opportunities are going to gatherings, either online or in person, joining a serve team, because you can really start to get to know people that way. We have different anchor groups that meet in a larger group setting to allow you to find your people, even in a Zoom season, right? We have these awesome growth events, which again are done digitally by and large, and you can get to know people a little bit to start to find your people. We think it's so important that you find your people, and we want to give you the opportunities here to do so. Something else that we see, though, from these 12 disciples, and again, I want you to write this down in your notes, is this: my people are who I learn with. My people are who I learn with. There's a lot that happens between chapters 3 and chapter 6. And remember, right, the disciples are originally called in that chapter 3 passage that I read first, where Jesus names all of them, but it's not until chapter 6 that they're actually sent out to do the work of Jesus. And so that brings the question in mind: what happened with the disciples between when they were called and when they are sent out by Jesus? I think the answer is this, is that they were learning together. I would encourage you to take some time tonight or this week to read chapters 4 and 5. It's a fairly quick read, and just see all the different things that Jesus has the disciples learn alongside of him. Jesus is following this apprenticeship model, right? Where he's doing and they're watching, and he's teaching, and then he's doing some and letting them do a little bit. He's following this apprenticeship model so that he can teach the disciples how to do really the Jesus things that he did in his ministry. And so you look, and the disciples had found their people, and the next thing was that they started to learn together. You see, in order to continue forging their bond as people, forging their bond as a group, they needed to grow and learn from Jesus together. We all need that. We really believe. It's why we titled it the series. That's why we put it on the wall facing Lowe's outside our physical location. We really believe that we're all learning here. And none of us have it figured out. And one of the best ways to grow with your people is to learn together. It's why at Anchor we have this thing called growth groups, right? We think growth groups are a really great way in a small group of your people, 3 to 5, to really get together and sit and say, how do we learn the way of Jesus together? It's what we have that opportunity for. It's also why we think being part of a larger group matters. Right? Eventually, Jesus is going to send the disciples out in pairs, but right now they're learning together as a larger group. It's why we gather together on Sunday mornings, again, either in person or here online, because we think that matters. We think being part of a larger community and coming together to learn together before we get sent back out into our neighborhoods, into our people groups, matters, because it ties us into this larger story. And we do believe we all need it because we are all learning here. There's a special bond that happens when you learn together. Some of my closest friends to this day, and people I know I can call no matter what, are people that I volunteered with doing youth ministry. And I'll never forget, I've been doing youth ministry for a couple of years, and I got a tough call at 2 a.m. It was a high school student who was panicking. He was worried about a friend of his. You see, she had gone to a party and gotten into some pretty serious trouble. And she was freaking out and needed a place to kind of be safe and process and really just crash for the night. And I knew that wasn't my place. And so I called one of our fellow female leaders who was a volunteer, one of the best people I've ever seen at leading in high school ministry. And we talked off and on to each other and to these students for about an hour between 2 and 3:30 a.m. in the morning. And eventually things all got settled. Both students had a place to stay that night and to crash and to process everything that they were feeling and thinking and really just feel heard and seen and loved. And let me tell you this, when you spend an hour on the phone with someone else at 2 a.m. helping deal with a student crisis, that bonds you together. We were learning in that moment. Student ministry feels like it's always learning, where you're figuring out, how do I love these students so well and I feel like I'm always messing up? But that night created that bond, and I know now that that's someone that I can call when I have a problem. That's someone that I know will answer my call at 2 a.m. Because you see, when you learn together, it strengthens your bond as people. I'd encourage you to this. If you found your people already, seek out those opportunities to learn together, to experience things together, to learn and say, how do we follow the way of Jesus together? And then the last thing that we see from the disciples that I want you to write down is this, is my people are who I journey with, right? Our people are chosen intentionally. They're who we learn with. And then finally, my people are who I journey with. In chapter 6, we see that the disciples are sent out. They're sent out on a journey to do the work of Jesus. They go out and practice. And it's interesting, we see this shift, as a commentator wrote it, from intensive learning to extensive evangelism. We see this shift happen and what that does for them as people, and it bonds them together even more. And you'll notice this, that even for this work where Jesus is clearly going, okay, we had gathered everyone together. We had all 12. Now, there's a lot that needs to be done. There's a lot of people who need to hear this message of hope. There's a lot of people who need healing. There's a lot of people who need prayer. And he doesn't send them out in 12 different places. He sends them out in 6 different places. Because Jesus knows this, that even with so much to do, it's still better to do it with someone else. He sends them out in pairs. He knows they're going to experience hardship. In fact, in chapter 6, if we go back to that text, he gives them instructions on how to deal with the hardship. He says, stay at the same house, but if any place refuses you or doesn't listen to you, which is saying in that time period, we have no hospitality for you, please leave. We don't care what happens to you. If anyone is that rude to you, shake its dust from your feet as soon as you leave. Jesus knows that his disciples, his followers, are going to face hardship when they go out and do this. And that's why he sends them out in pairs. See, there's something significant that happens when we journey with our people. One of my favorite people to work with that I would put in that group of my people is a guy named Tim. And Tim was an intern when I was a youth pastor in a church on Bainbridge Island. And Tim and I didn't know each other before working together. And so we started working together, doing youth ministry, learning intentionally together for 9 months, doing youth ministry in Bainbridge Island. And then Tim and I had an opportunity where a couple different places had asked us to go on trips to lead students. There was a Young Life camp in Eastern Washington that wanted us to come out and speak and be with these high school students for about a week. And we knew that we would do that. And then the very next day, we would go to our church's high school camp for the next 5 or 6 days. And so Tim and I said yes, and we started this journey together. And we packed up the car. It smelled terrible because we had these like rubber soccer balls, like bubbles that people could play bubble soccer in that just stank up the car for the entire 6-hour drive out to Eastern Washington. We hang out and do the exhausting work of hanging out with students as minimal adult supervision besides us and a couple other people for 5 days. We're completely cut off from people that we love because there's no cell phone reception out there. We slept way too close for 2 adult men ever should, because that's just how the accommodations work. And we were dead tired and then left and drove 2 more hours to do it all again for another week. And again, we did the same thing in those trenches together, learning, having fun, but being exhausted. I remember we're driving home. We're just so ready to get home. And as we're going through Tacoma to go back up to Bainbridge Island, my car dies. So Tim and I sit for another 3 hours in the car and wait for the tow truck to come and for eventually my dad, even though I'm an adult, to come rescue us and pick us up in the car. And let me tell you, those 2 weeks that I had with Tim brought us closer together as people than the previous 9 months ever did. See, something special happens when we journey together with our people. And one of the cool things that we see about the disciples is I believe that something really significant happens when you journey for a long period of time together. Most scholars can look at Jesus' ministry and say he was roughly doing earthly ministry for about 3 years. As the disciples had been on this intensive journey with Jesus, sometimes in their hometown, sometimes traveling around, been through a ton together over these years. And in Matthew chapter 28, right, it's at the end of the book of Matthew, which is another gospel, the disciples have a moment with Jesus where they're about to receive from him what's known as the Great Commission. And it's some of Jesus' last words to the disciples, his last instructions to them before he ascends into heaven. And what's interesting is there's a little nugget in Matthew 28, verse 16 and 17 that I really want to zero in on as we talk about journeying together. In verse 16 of Matthew 28, it says this. Then the 11 disciples, 11, because since Judas betrayed Jesus, he's out of the picture. The 11 disciples left for Galilee, going to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but some of them doubted. But some of them doubted. I think that's so significant. These disciples had seen Jesus do incredible, crazy, never seen before things. They had seen him die. And they had seen him again 3 days later. And some of them doubted if that's what they had seen. And honestly, I get that. I don't know about you, but oftentimes I find myself in the shoes of one of those disciples who says, Jesus, I know you said you've risen again. Show me the holes. Like, show me where they crucified you. I don't buy it yet. I think that's okay. Jesus still had space for them. But I think it's really interesting that they got through all this. They had seen all this, and some of them still doubted. And here's what I know. That those disciples who still doubted, they wouldn't have ever gotten there to see Jesus in the first place if they hadn't been with their people. You see that there were disciples who said, no, come on. This is real. This is legit. I promise you, Jesus is exactly who he said he was and who we believed him to be. And I know you're doubting. I know you're struggling, but come with me right now and see Jesus. And because they journeyed together, because they were with their people, they got to experience the grace and the goodness and the blessing of Jesus that they would have missed out on otherwise. I think that's so powerful to look at. To say that some of the disciples had to probably drag some of their friends and say, no, we've been through too much together to give up now. You're coming with me. We're going to the mountaintop and we're going to see Jesus. Anchor, I know this. Some of you right now, you're discouraged. Some of you right now, you're in a hard place. Some of you are doubting, is God even real? Is God who he says he is? If that's you, I understand. It's a hard, it's a lonely place to be. I'm glad you're still here. And Hager, some of you are really energized and really excited right now. And you fully believe that 2021 is your year. And maybe 2020 even was your year in the midst of so many things. And here's the beautiful thing about the church and the beautiful thing about community and the beautiful thing about finding your people. We need all of you. Anchor, we need those of you who are energized and ready and are not burned out to lead the charge, to grab your people, even those people who are your people but feel tired, feel lost, feel doubtful, and say, come with me. We're going to follow the way of Jesus together. And I promise you this, that Jesus is exactly who he said he was. And if you just come with me, we're going to see it together. Anchor, can we be a place where both those kinds of people are welcome and they work together to follow the way of Jesus? That's my hope. That's my dream for our community. I think that you're here watching this today, I don't think that's an accident. I think all of us today, as we're listening and processing this, have a next step that God wants us to take at some point this week. He doesn't want us to put it off. He wants us to take it this week. Maybe you're here and you don't have your people. I've been there. I think this God is asking you to really take some time and pray and to look at opportunities to start to find your people. Maybe you think you found your people, but you haven't actually had that conversation where, like, we're in this together, right? So maybe God's calling you to have that conversation with some friends this week. Maybe you have your people, but you realize you're just kind of skating through life together. And it's a lot of fun, but you're starting to ask yourself the question, is this all that there is? And I promise you it's not. That Jesus actually says there is more in front of you than you can ever imagine. And so you and your people, you're going to start to have those conversations, to take those steps to say, how does it look like to start learning as a group together? And maybe even what does it look like to go on a journey together? I just ask this, take some time this week to really consider one of those next steps. I believe this, as a community, we're going to be stronger as a result.